just because you may not be coming from an adjacent design industry does not mean that there's nothing valuable in your past. Probably you've worked with other people. You've probably had to collaborate on projects. You've probably had to pitch ideas, convince people of stuff, told like narratives and stories in your work. All of that is super relevant.
Hello, friends. My name is Kirill, and you're listening to my UX Career podcast. On this podcast, I'm sharing my personal thoughts on how to start a career path in UX, how to grow your skills and become a better designer. Also, I have conversations with other designers and design leaders trying to show that there are many different perspectives and opinions on the key questions about UX career. So, if you're a UX designer or considering becoming one, this podcast will get you better prepared for finding a job in UX. Opinions expressed on this podcast are my own and do not necessarily reflect the views of my current or previous employers. And don't forget, this is just one human's point of view. Also, if you're interested in UX career insights and some key learnings from my experience, you can sign up for my newsletter about UX career. Go to newsletter.uxcareer.co. Now, back to the episode. In this episode, I'm talking to Irina Belova as a part of the Q&A with Design Manager series. Irina is the Product Design Manager at Clio, a Vancouver-based tech company in legal space. And we talk about many different topics that you will find very, very insightful and interesting. We talk about her journey from journalism to design leadership, the valuable experiences from the previous careers, and what she is looking for in resumes and portfolios. We also talk about how you should tell the story for a project and the case study structure and why it's critical to start it by framing the problem. You'll love this episode. Enjoy. Hi, Irina. Thank you for joining me in this session. And I really appreciate your willingness to share your insights and some opinions about a few key topics for the design job seekers. Thank you.
Yeah, it's my absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Sweet. Let's start with your current role in the company you work at and what do you do there?
Yeah, I work at a company called Clio. They're based in Vancouver, British Columbia. It's a company that makes practice management software for lawyers with a lofty mission of transforming the legal experience for all. And my role is as a product design manager. And I'm currently managing 5 designers that all work in a particular portfolio. And that portfolio is concerned with helping our customers, so helping lawyers create an excellent experience for their clients.
And could you tell us a bit more about the origin story and how did you decide to go into UX field? And maybe you had some previous adventures and chapters in your career. And what was your overall trajectory with the key steps and roles?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a couple of past lives actually. I After high school, I thought I was going to become a journalist, and so I went to university to study journalism. And actually, I was on a couple of editorial teams for some student newspapers and liked doing the design and layout of the physical magazines more than I actually enjoyed the writing. And so that kind of gave me a couple of hints. And while sitting in my graduation ceremony, I had my application for design school in my hands. So I went straight from university into a graphic design program. So 8 years later, after finishing high school, I worked as a graphic designer and kind of had a bit of a loopy trajectory there too. I started actually typesetting novels and ended up working for an architecture firm. And this was actually where I started to think about, like, well, actually, who is the audience that is consuming the work that I'm putting out there? So this was signage for building projects. And one in particular that I remember was signage for a cancer research center. So I started to think about, like, who are the people that would be coming into this building and needing to find their way around the place? So whether it's someone who's seeking treatment or a researcher, like, what does that experience look like and how can I make it as seamless as possible? And also around this time, I was started to get a little bit annoyed with graphic design and how subjective it felt to me. And I don't know if you know architects, but they're generally quite opinionated about all aspects of design. So there was a lot of subjective, like, hey, I don't like that color. Can you change that font? And I started to think, like, is there some more objective tools that I can use to actually solve design problems? And, started thinking about user experience. And then I actually did a part-time course. This was back in Sydney, Australia, at a place called General Assembly, which is similar to BrainStation or Red Academy that we have here in Canada. And worked at a couple of startups for a couple of years, working on specific little projects, and kind of transitioned into UX that way. And then, yeah, packed up my bags and moved to Canada.
And then, since you joined, since you came to Canada, what were your kind of, I guess, trajectory here? And I'm curious, when did you decide to go the management route? As I
Yeah,
understand, you're a
that's
hiring manager right now, and yeah.
that's
So what's the
correct.
transition there?
Yeah, so I came to Canada really just for a change of scene without any kind of prospects or really any connections. And luckily, I actually found Clio about a month after I landed in 2016, and I started as a senior product designer, and then moved through um, the ranks to become a product design lead. I actually then spent 2020 at a different company, and then came back to Clio in 2021 to as a product design manager. And actually, like, at the time, to be honest, it was a feeling like, okay, I'm a senior designer. Well, management kind of makes sense to me. And so because I didn't really put in like a ton of thought into what that means, I think I struggled for a couple of years around, like, I came to the difficult realization, which seems obvious now, that management is literally a whole other job. And so it was kind of like, you're a designer today, go and do this completely new job tomorrow. And so, yeah, there was some hiccups and hurdles, and definitely a lot of lessons along the way. But I think it was ultimately the right decision, and I find it super rewarding now.
So if you had to choose, and regardless the, I guess, the financial aspect, if you had to choose the individual contributor, like the crafts person, and the management person, the team lead person, what would you prefer?
Like if I had to choose my own role now.
Yeah. So because and the reason I'm asking, from all the stories that I've heard so far, when people transition from a person who was doing design to the management, just because the roles are so different in most cases, uh, many people miss the craft and they miss this kind of really designing things because they just don't have as much time to do that with this new role. So I'm curious to hear if you have some similar feelings, and if you maybe some time from time to time just switch to this designing mode instead of the management and leading mode.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of see design really as solving problems. And so that mindset really helps me see my role is I'm still designing. It's just what I'm designing is a team. And like, I may not be necessarily, in Figma, you know, picking colors and choosing typefaces anymore, but I still kind of see myself as, solving problems as a designer. So, um I think also the fact that I find my work with individuals and people just so personally rewarding. I definitely prefer that side of things over um the craft and execution and actually releasing product, which I know some of the people that I work with are like, I will absolutely never go into management because I just love collaborating with people on releasing product and solving problems for customers. And for me, I get lit up by helping people do that stuff.
So you already mentioned that one of your key learnings over the course of your career was that management and team management is a very different role comparing to a designer, right? Which you wish kind of you knew earlier, or at least you realized earlier. I'm curious if there are any other lessons, or maybe like what do you wished you knew when you were starting the career? Like what you think would make it easier for you, that you could advise to the newcomers?
Something that I kind of wish I made more of, or at least not break away from so um, actively, was really embrace the fact that I've had like a past life and past experiences and whole other industries that I was involved with. So both journalism, which has really helped me like in retrospect because I'm kind of have that those writing skills, and also graphic design. And I think, I talk to a lot of entry level designers, and a lot of them have come from some other industry. And I think it's a shame when I see applications and resumes and they don't make the most of that. They're not screaming from the rooftops like, I was a graphic designer and now I want to get into UX, or maybe I was a psychology major and now I want to get into UX. All of that stuff is super relevant because, as designers, we're solving problems for people. Um, and all of those skills from your past are super relevant and really really helps you stand out from the crowd, from everyone else who also did a boot camp and has a project to share in their portfolio.
Yeah, I completely agree that I've seen this as well. That when people just don't, and I think I had actually the same issue when I was going through that phase. That people, it's hard to analyze your own strengths, right? And it's really hard to accept the fact that all your previous learnings and path, and even if it's a different industry or different role that you were in, they all add to your mindset. They all add to the things you can do, and you actually know how to work with other people, which is a
Hmm.
huge part of the job as a designer. And it also makes your kind of your opinions and perspectives on even like design things more diverse, and I guess more, you have a completely different lens. And what I've learned to appreciate is, from my experience, the more diverse the background of a person is, regardless what their level is or what their job is, the more I get the feeling that they have a more, I guess, a richer lens that they have on many different things.
Yeah.
Which, as a result, from what I've seen so far, usually you would see a different quality of feedback, a different quality of questions, a different quality of the end results as well. So it's kind of back to this diversity. I think the diversity of the backgrounds and experiences within one human being also results in a more diverse and thought out experiences and products that we build. So I totally agree. This
Absolutely.
is super, super valuable, and I wish more people realize that it's actually their benefit and their way that they can stand out from others, especially with all the boot camps when this all
Yeah, and
looks
I
the
can
same.
see how people get to this place where they don't, because I guess they start thinking about something like UX because they probably aren't so into whatever it is they're doing already. And so they kind of like, you know what, I'm going to, start a clean slate. I'm no longer X, I am a UX designer now. So that's all I'm focused on. Whereas yeah, like I think all of that other stuff is just like makes you a better UX designer.
Exactly. And I completely agree that, like in your case with journalism and graphic design and architecture, this is like super, super relevant and very, I guess, like sibling industries that definitely all those learnings, especially journalism, can be applied to so many things as a individual contributor, as a designer, and also as a manager. I think like really talking to and like learning how to work with people and how to
Mhm.
use different communication styles and methods to make sure that the message is delivered in the right way. I think that's a huge, huge differentiator from many other people. And definitely, yeah, a good call out to kind of use those as a way to stand out. The challenge that I've seen though is, and I've had this question from a few folks, that when they transition careers, but the previous career is hardly connected to their like the new passion, the design. And I wonder if there is like maybe any other suggestions or tips that you would apply to your I guess path and toolkit, if you were in these shoes, how would you really stand out from everybody else if you cannot use the previous background as one of these differentiation points?
Yeah, I think before I answer that, I just want to challenge everyone to, just because you may not be coming from an adjacent design industry does not mean that there's nothing valuable in your past. Probably you've worked with other people. You've probably had to collaborate on projects. You've probably had to pitch ideas, convince people of stuff, told like narratives and stories in your work. All of that is super relevant. But anyway, to your original question, I think one thing that I really am only starting to do now, and maybe the pandemic has kind of pushed me in this direction because I can't see anyone in person, so all I do is like troll the internet, is reach out for help from folks in the industry from around the world. So, I mean, it could be reaching out to people on LinkedIn and be okay with the fact that most people are not going to get back to you. Don't be discouraged. People are busy. A lot of people just don't look at LinkedIn at all. But I think there's a lot of other avenues where you can meet people, get a whole bunch of different perspectives, get advice, whether that's, setting up a mentorship session through something like ADP List or joining a Slack community. I think I speak to a lot of junior designers who are just intimidated by the prospect of joining this industry, especially when they have to do it from home. They can't go to a meetup. They're a little bit nervous. They're not sure. They can't really grasp, like, what is this world that I'm kind of trying to get into? And I think the more people you meet and the more people you talk to, like, you kind of figure out that actually there's just a bunch of people and they're pretty friendly and have good opinions and ideas, and it's not as scary as it seems. So I would just say, like, reach out to as many people as you can through as many different avenues who are doing the job that you want. And like, I think that'll help a lot with that nervousness about getting into the industry.
Okay, let's talk about the resume and tell me more about what's a perfect resume for you. So as a hiring manager, what really stands out in the resumes? What's your opinion on the creative versus standard, more like traditional format? Any tips or advice or mistakes that they can avoid?
Yeah. I don't think there's really a perfect resume for me. That's kind of why I would say, like, go for something like clarity and legibility and clean design rather than use your resume as the place to let your personality shine. Um, and I think what I often see missing, and what we've kind of already discussed, is talk about all that previous experience that is relevant. I love reading where I love to see personality is that like initial intro blurb where people tell me like where they've come from, why they're interested in design, what do they want to get out of it. Um, that is the bit that's most interesting to me aside from the experience itself. And something that I would generally say I tend to ignore is kind of like the skills list, um, where to me, particularly with designers that are in an earlier part of their career, I'm looking less for like what specific tools you're able to use and more about what is the potential. And I get that detail more from what you've done, so your experience, and then kind of who you are.
Maybe you can recall an example from maybe a resume that you've seen recently or sometime in the past. How a person can really convince you that they have the potential. So, and you're talking about that. This is like the main answer that you're looking for in this in the resume for a junior folk, right? So, I wonder if there is like any. What would be the signal of that the person can do that?
I'm not sure that you can do it in a resume alone. I think it would have to be a combination of like resume and portfolio, especially if you don't necessarily have any real world projects. If you do have any real world projects that have seen the light of day, put them at the top of the list. Put them above any bootcamp that you've done, any other school projects that you have. They will always be more valuable than the school projects and will be more unique than any school project you have. And then a great portfolio for me, particularly with more junior designers who are likely to be showing me work from school, is less the stitching together of UX techniques, like, you know, and then I did interviews, and then I did a user journey, and then I created a persona, then I did a user journey. And tell me why you did specific things and what you learned from each stage that helped you with the next stage. And what I actually tell people is start with writing the story of the project. So pretend like you're doing a short story in high school or wherever you might write a short story, and figure out like what are those interesting inflection points, like where did the conflict come, who are the main characters, and the bits that are the most interesting, like those bits where for some reason maybe you did some research and you had to go in a completely different direction, or if you did happen to work with other people, there was some tension between you and them and how you overcame that. Those are the bits that I want to know about. um, and if you can talk about those in your portfolio, I think that shows to me that you're not just ticking boxes and learning how to do a persona and learning how to do a user journey. You're actually now thinking critically about how do these tools that I've learned about, how do they help me solve problems um, in the work that I create.
That's a very interesting metaphor about like the storytelling and like the inflection points. It's like adding a bit of, I guess, a subtle drama to the story for a
Yeah,
case study
because like
to make
if
it
you tell me that
interesting. Mm.
everything is perfectly smooth, I'm not gonna believe you because it just like it never is, even
It's
at
never
school.
is, yeah. It never
Yeah.
is, yeah. Interesting, good point. So, and thinking from the, I guess, the format or like even like the means, the channels, PDF, web, any number of case study projects. How detailed do you expect them to be? So everything besides the storytelling and the structure itself.
I think that's a good question. Like, and I don't think there's necessarily like a clear-cut answer. Um, I would probably say the bits that you do identify as like really the interesting points in the project, really flesh those out and talk about like your thinking at those points and how that may have changed from, new data that you received. And then probably get lighter and lighter in the other sections. I would say that always frame the project well, so clearly state the customer problem that you're solving and word it like a problem for a person rather than we wanted to improve X. That's not a problem. Um, and if it's a particular business that I need to know the details of in order to understand the rest of the project, make sure you spell out what that business is and give me all the context I need so I don't have to put that together. um but also like don't like put throw the kitchen sink at it and expect that you will be giving the extra detail when you're in the interview.
Okay, got it. One of the problems that many people experience, especially coming out of like boot camps and all these similar programs, is that they don't have real world examples, right? So they have just like one, I guess, semi project and some task, like just kind of to show the method. Like heuristic evaluation is one of the popular ones. So it's not even like two projects. So if you were in these shoes, how would you add a real work experience project before you get before you get the first job? Because it's almost like a chicken and an egg situation. So you need to have some kind of really valid examples of work in your portfolio to get noticed and hired. But on the other hand, how do you get those? So what would you do in this case?
Yeah, I mean it's a tough challenge, and I think I would try and look at the projects I do have, like the school projects, and think about, okay, so I'm completed the design, how can I indicate that I understand that there's more to this process than just what I've done here? And start thinking about, okay, well, how if I've launched this work, how would I measure the success of it? So start to think about those metrics and maybe even start thinking about, you know what, like I actually am not super happy with this and this. I would test that further and maybe I would change it in this way. Um and the reason why like I'm kind of hesitant to give advice of like go and work for free somewhere is that like that is not the reality for a lot of people. Like they are likely have a day job, they maybe have a family, they maybe have kids, like to expect for you to then go and, hustle and find those projects to fill your portfolio with may not be feasible, particularly like during a pandemic. So even though that kind of is the reality of what I did between UX school and getting a full-time job, like I did kind of like reach out to startups and say like, hey, are you interested in maybe I could develop a set of personas for you or do some research here or there. That would be awesome, but I think there's if that's just not a realistic option for you, I think there's ways that you can frame your school projects to be feel a little bit more real world.
That's a good point that not every person has the luxury and time to work on those side projects. Awesome. So let's talk about the future of the profession itself. And I'm curious if you have any, I guess, your gut feelings about when will we get replaced by robots, and maybe there are some parts of the UX design world that are more future proof from that point of view. So they're like harder to be replaced by the automation.
Yeah. I think that's kind of why I said earlier that on a resume, I'm not really interested in what tools you can use because the tools will always change. And I think there is a world where, the actual creation of design artifacts will be almost entirely automated. But I think where automation, I'm not going to say is impossible, but is much more difficult, is truly understanding human nature and people's problems and people's underlying motivations and pain points and what's kind of going on in their heads. And so that's why I think if you think of yourself less as like a creator of mock-ups and more of as a problem solver for humans, I think you would be setting yourself up to like I guess future proof yourself in a way where, hey, maybe you're designing the software that will automate design. You're basically like telling the robot what designs you want created because you know the problem that you're solving for your users so well. Yeah, I'm looking forward to our robot overlords.
Yeah, I completely agree. And so everything that happens before is much harder to convert into these assets that the machine can spit out. What are your thoughts on design exercises, the whiteboarding, like take-home exercises, all the
Yeah.
different flavors? Because there is a huge debate, I mean, ongoing debate about the efficacy of this. And from what I've seen, the design take-home exercises are kind of mostly the big red flag, especially if it's like free labor for a problem that's specific to the business, which is like a big no. But there are so many different varieties, and the opinions are quite varied. Because I kind of, and also from the, I guess the company perspective, I've heard some good arguments about how these tools allow them to understand, to get the answers to the questions they have in a way that kind of basically helps them understand if that's the right person for the team or for this role. So what's your opinion on those?
I think that as someone who has been a hiring manager who has put candidates through design challenges, in-person ones where the person shows up into the room and given a problem and has to work through that. Um, I can see the argument for potentially getting the signal that you want, but at the risk of introducing and discounting so many people who don't think that way, who I think it's kind of exclusionary and really biases to people who can think on the spot and who, probably process through thinking out loud. Because I think there's a designer, and it's a pretty common personality, who would rather take a problem, think about it deeply, and develop a solution that way. And I think like in-person exercises really are really challenging and potentially impossible for people like that. So in general, I think I'm definitely not such a big fan, and I think there's ways that you can get the signal you need through presentation of past work and through just a standard interview. And then I guess you could say, well, if they want to take the work away, do a take home. Again, you're now expecting people to spend time that they may not have. Maybe they're a parent, maybe they 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 just don't have the time. You're now kind of biasing against those folks, and I think we can do better as hiring managers to get the signal we need without forcing people to jump through these hoops, which are sometimes really stressful and not super fair.
Yeah, I totally agree. I don't see a perfect solution here. It's
Yeah,
definitely, I guess, I understand the need from the hiring manager's perspective, but there are so many, I guess, nuances about the method that is chosen to get those answers, and none of the methods that I've seen are perfect, right? And each of them, they kind of make it easier or harder for people with different preferences and just different way of working. So, for example, as you say, the whiteboarding kind of favors candidates who are easier to think like on the spot. But the question is also, how likely is this way of working in the real life, right? So it's
exactly.
definitely like you're not going to design a product like in an hour, or like it's always like multi-step and like very collaborative process, like in most cases. So it's not really close to the environment that you'll be in. So what exactly is it testing? The quick
Yeah,
thinking, and but if you start thinking about all the, I guess, disabilities and all the kind of ethical questions and diversity and inclusion, this is also a big red flag, because some people may require actually more thinking just because they cannot think faster. Like it's a very tricky one. I agree. And take home is definitely a, I guess, potential solution, but again, expectation that people will have time is again excluding, I am sure, a lot of folks from this process, or they have to sacrifice something that actually it's maybe not very ethical to ask them to, like time
mhm.
with the family or something else, right? So it's a tricky one, yeah. But still, lots of companies use it. Question about actually Clio. Maybe it's a good segue into that part. What? How do you have design exercises there? Let's go with this.
We used to actually, but we haven't for over a year now. And we find that, from my experience, the signal we got from the in-person exercises was weak and left us feeling really uncertain. And I think moving to a structure where it's just um, a regular kind of behavioral interview and presentation of work, and you get to talk to a whole bunch of different people in a whole bunch of different disciplines, the signal is much stronger, and we're definitely not losing anything from no longer having those design challenges.
That's a very interesting point. From what I've seen, the majority of companies have some sort of this exercise as a part of their process. Would you be able to share like the full process for a designer, like the interview process, and how long does it usually take?
Yeah, so we try to make it as quick as possible and not kind of leave any candidates hanging for too long. And there's a couple of different ways that it would start. Like, potentially, if a candidate comes in, first of all, they will speak to one of our talent acquisition specialists. So, they get a sense from the candidate what they're looking for, what they're excited about, and then the candidate can ask the recruitment person, all of the fun logistical questions, and then and another way that the process could start is we actually reach out and then um, to someone so it's more us reaching out to them, and then we could set up like a coffee chat with one of the design managers so the person can find out more about the opportunity and Clio in general. Then there's a hiring manager interview, which is likely to be the manager that you would have if you were to join the team. And that is just finding out a lot more about you and your previous work. After that, there is a case study presentation where you're asked to present one project that you've completed recently that you're particularly proud of. Go through the whole process of that, and that will be with a hiring manager and then at least another member of the design team. And then there's also a triad interview, which a triad is basically how Clio is structured. Clio teams are structured where every squad is led by a triad of a designer, a product manager, and an engineering manager. And so this triad interview is kind of more around how do you collaborate with other disciplines, to get you to the candidate more more exposure to who you might be working with, and to give some of our folks some idea of what it's like to work with you. And then there is a final kind of conversation with the VP of product. And yeah, that's kind of it. And yeah, I think the whole process generally takes a few weeks, a couple of weeks. Um, and we try to make it as quick as we can because we have a lot of hiring to do, and we want to make sure that the candidate experience is as great as possible.
And what's your design process? How do you involve users and their input, and like what are the key steps for a typical project?
While we have like a general process that Clio follows, it's really up to each individual team to kind of determine what's required based on the problem they're trying to solve. And this is where the designer and the product manager would collaborate pretty closely. The product manager will obviously own the business problem. The designer would be thinking about, well, what is the problem for the users, and they might together collaborate on discovery interviews with some of our customers. We now have two product design researchers as well as a customer insights research team, and the product design researchers conduct their own kind of foundational studies to help all of the teams have a really good picture of who our customers are, but also help with specific research studies for individual teams as well. And then once we go through the sort of ideation process, there's also usability testing throughout. So that includes both moderated usability testing in some cases, but we've also just recently introduced Maze as a tool that we use for much faster turnaround on usability testing, when we can do like really light usability tests that we can get decent signal on from lots of different responses. So that's been really helpful as well.
So, what does the product designer role entail? So, is it like, for example, the usability testing? Like, do they do it on their own, or researchers help them with this?
They would be determining like what research questions they want to answer with the usability test. So they would put together the research plan and they would execute the usability testing too. They have researchers available to them to maybe refine what their questions are, maybe refine their usability tasks to make sure that they get like as best a signal as possible. But ultimately, they're completely in control of determining that yes, we need to do usability testing and what that will entail.
Do you have any UX writers or strategists, or like any more like specialized roles?
Right now, we just have the researchers, but yeah, in the future, that might change for sure.
And how big is the team total?
Oh, that's a great question. It's over 20 people, and the reason why I can't give you the clear answers because we are hiring so many folks. It feels like every other week we have someone new starting. So I'm worried that if I give you the answer, it'll be the wrong one.
I think like above 20 is great. Yeah. Yeah, that already means that it's a big team, that there are many opportunities to learn from other folks on the team.
Oh, absolutely. And we also have we've just started a design mentorship program where we partner senior and staff designers with more junior and intermediate folks, and we kind of have set up like a 6 months process for them to work together and then kind of cycle through.
Okay, so and what about hiring entry level and junior designers? Any actions that Clio is taking there?
Actually, yes, we're currently in the process of hiring our first two product design interns at Clio. The team is super excited about that initiative. We we're aiming to start sometime in the fall, depending on how the recruitment process goes. And yeah, it's going to be an 8-month internship program where we'll hire two interns, and those folks will get an opportunity to develop their skills alongside some of Clio's senior designers.
That sounds amazing. And is there any special, I guess, requirements about applying? And particularly, I'm curious about, maybe you limit the program only to some specific institutions, or maybe special programs from the local universities.
No, we don't actually limit the program even to students at all. So it doesn't need to be someone who's currently studying.
Oh,
It could be
really? That's
someone,
amazing.
yeah, it could be maybe somebody who completed a boot camp. No design education is actually required, but we do ask for you to either submit a case study or some kind of example of your design process, just for us to get an understanding of, what your experience has been like.
That's excellent news. Yeah, that I think that definitely expands the list of opportunities for the entry level folks. Yeah, super happy to hear that. And I wonder, because we already discussed the interview process for, I guess, the non-intern position. And I wonder if the process for this program, the interviewing process, differs.
It does differ a little bit. It's a little bit shorter. We still aim to have the candidates speak with as many people at Clio as possible. So, our team gets a sense of who they are, and they get a sense of what our team is all about. But basically, most of the interview rounds are just a shorter conversation. There's still a conversation with your manager. There's still a case study presentation, which is 30 minutes instead of an hour. There's conversations with members of the design team, and there's a conversation with somebody to make sure the person is a culture add to Clio, which is something that every candidate goes through as well.
Nice. Is it too early to share the volume of applications that you've been receiving? Because I think it's at this point, it's probably about a month or so, a couple months since you opened
Yeah,
the program.
it's about a month. So I'm actually not the hiring manager for the role, but I know that we've had a lot of interest.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think I'm super happy to hear that Clio is one of those few companies doing this. Hopefully, you'll lead by example, and more companies start offering programs like this, including Amazon.
Yeah, I'm thrilled with this program too, and I'm really excited to be able to talk to you about it.
Awesome. So these are all the questions that I wanted to talk to you today. I really
Cool.
appreciate your time and sharing all those thoughts and insights about your particular experience and how you evaluate candidates and applicants, and also some of the details about Clio. I really appreciate that.
Thanks
Thanks,
for
man.
having me.
Yeah. I wish you a wonderful day.
Yeah, you too.
Thanks for listening. If you want to see more episodes and support this podcast, the best thing you can do is leave a review on iTunes and share with your friends and colleagues. If you have specific questions you would want me to answer, you can submit them on the UX Career website. Go to uxcareer.co/questions. Goodbye, friends.